Hey, everybody. I'd like to welcome all of you to another episode of Diffusing the WMSCOG. I'm your host, Edgar, and today we have another guest, another former member of the WMSCOG, Scarlet. Scarlet, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Scarlet. I am from the church in Salt Lake City, and I was in it for 10 years.
Okay, cool. So, very happy to have you here and ready to dive into kind of your story. So, let's start from the beginning. Like, how did you join the WMSCOG? Who introduced you to it?
So was my sister. uh,
Okay.
so my sister was on campus because at this time she was going to school. And this was like back in 2011 or 2012 at the time. So the church was really small here. It was just like in an office building at the time. And so my sister, like, she comes home and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I met this guy and he was telling me about like Christmas and Sunday and all of this stuff like and she was just so shocked by it and then I was too, but it's kind of funny cuz we weren't really raised on religion ever. So my mom didn't raise us like that. Like we would go to church like every once in a while when we were little, but she always just taught us that we could do whatever we wanted as we got older, but she just didn't really like church and stuff. So we never grew up in that stuff. So we kind of just fell for the story that they had because it made the most sense, right? And so, yeah, they were saying about the sun god and sun god worship and all of the pagan holidays. And then, of course, they brought up the Passover and all of that. And so me and my sister were interested. So we went, and at first she was like, just go with me because I don't know if they're going to murder me or not. She was scared.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'll go with you. And then we ended up studying like for about like 6 hours. Like we were studying
Okay.
for a long time. And then, they hit you with the, uh, oh, if you want to be saved with the seal of God, don't you want to take part in that today so that you could be saved from any disasters that come? And me, I was only like 18 or so at the time, and I was like, I don't want like anything bad to happen to me. So I got baptized that same day. My sister got baptized like a week or so later. Like, so that's how we started to go. And then a year later, my mom and my brother were baptized. So that's kind of how it started. And then it was a little rickety in the beginning because they didn't tell you An Sang Hong's name at that time. So when they did the the prayer over you when they're baptizing you and they said his name, I it kind of went over my head a little bit. I was like, that's weird, but okay. And then
Yeah.
we went into the service, and then they were saying his name at the end, like, and they were saying it like An Sang Hong, the way they say it. And I was like, and I looked at my sister and I was like, what did we do? And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, what did we do? I was like, is this a demon? I don't know what's going on. And I got scared, so I didn't go back for like a while.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, like, no, let's clarify some stuff. And they're like, come back, let's study a little bit more. Like, we'll tell you about who that is and why we say their name and stuff like that. And I was like, fine, okay. So I went back. And then I was kind of on and off for a few years. And then I got super deep into it. Like when I was like 4 years in or 5 years in, that's when I started to kind of be more into it and stuff. And I started to be in the choir and then like helping out group leaders, and then I was working to become like a unit leader. So that's how it started with me to get
Okay.
church.
Okay, cool. So let me ask you this. What year was it when you guys joined?
2012. That was
2012.
that they were saying the end of the world was, you know, uh, the end of the world was coming, and don't you want to be saved from the disaster that's going to happen and all of that stuff. So yeah, that they were out here on a short-term mission to come and do all that for 2012.
Okay, so you got to take part. You witnessed it, right? So you
Yeah.
remember them telling you. Do you remember them telling you during that time that there was going to be a point in time where mother said that it was done and that we
Yeah.
could not bring any more fruit because the tabernacle was complete and then we were going to go to heaven.
Yeah, so that was like they were doing that from 2012 up to like 2014, I believe.
Yeah.
Because I remember I had so much anxiety because they kept saying like, oh, like the tabernacle, this is going to be the year, because I wasn't the year of Jubilee like 20, or was that 2018?
Jubilee was 2014.
2014. So
Yeah.
yes, 2014. Yes. They were that year they were saying that I remember they were also saying that that's the year that we're possibly going to go home, because that's the year of Jubilee and all of this stuff, and we need to bring in all of the materials before, before the end of that year too. So I do remember it was a pivotal time.
Yeah, so you remember 2012, you remember 2014, you remember being told that the world was going to end, that Father was coming, and
Yeah.
now we're sitting here in 2025, like what happened, right?
Yeah. That was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, I know, right? So pretty crazy now that we look back at it now, right? And it's kind of cool that we actually have the opportunity to look back and see how kind of lost in the sauce we were, because unfortunately there's still a lot of members that are there and they're, being gaslit right now. They're being told that those kind of prophecies were never taught. So it's always good to have, people on the show that remember and can attest to those things, but let me ask you this, like, so you said when you first joined, you were very young, right? And you and your sister joined. And so even right off the back, like just hearing you say about like how they didn't bring up An San Hong's name, that is so common. Like that is one of the biggest things that I remember is that during that time, we always kept An San Hong's name hidden, and especially no mention about like Zongil Ja. And it's so deceptive, because like if this place has the perfect truth or is the true church, why not tell people up front everything that you believe, unless you know that by telling people up front everything you believe, they're not going to accept it. They're going to run away from you because they're going to be like, what the heck, that's creepy. But even speaking to what you said, how even hearing An San Hong's name in the service, that kind of bugged you out, right? Like what is going on? That reminds me of like even I can imagine like during the prayer of our wish, what was going through your mind when you heard the prayer of our wish for the first time?
Oh, I was like, what language is this? And then I was like, oh, this is Korean. I was like, why is it this in Korean? And I was just like, I looked at my sister, and we just kind of looked at each other, and I was just like, well, I'll go along with it, I guess. And then it just kind of creeped me out at the end when they just said it the way they said On Sang Hong's name.
Yeah.
I have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah, and then they always hit you with the, in the Korean accent. Whoever's doing the praying or whatever, they hit you with the heavy An San Hong right at the end of their prayer. So let me ask you this, while you were a member of the church, in the beginning stages, like was there any red flags that you noticed like right off the back?
Yes, and I wish that like I took more heed to them, because like I was only like a few years in. So at the time, my brother was in it. And actually, I think he was baptized not a year after. I think he was baptized just like a few months after me and my sister. It's kind of all a blur now. But I do remember this one time that my brother, he's black. He had like an afro at the time. And he was like in his era of like wearing dashikis and kind of getting more into like his more black side, you know what I mean, and kind of discovering that part of himself. And he would always be told like by the members that he needs to cut his hair and he needs to look more presentable, and that it just doesn't look professional, and stuff like this. And so then I had told a missionary about it, and like I told him, I was like, well, they keep telling my brother that he doesn't look professional and he needs to like dress this way and this way, but the Bible says come as you are, you know what I mean? And he kind of dismissed it, and he's like, our members would never say that. Our members love everyone. like just
Mm.
kind of gaslighting, like,
Yeah.
no, you never say that. I'm like, well, he told me that they did. And he's like, well, that's your brother's word over theirs. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
shocked. And then like there was another time my brother saw a homeless guy and he was thirsty. So my brother was like, oh, well, we have water at the church and like there's some food and I can come bring it to you. And they were like, no, 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 we don't do that. We don't serve the homeless. And my brother's like, well, in the Bible, doesn't it say to serve the homeless? And
Yeah.
like, yeah, no, but like people like that, then they just come back for the food and the water and stuff. And so we actually don't serve the homeless, brother. We don't do that, you know?
Yeah.
And so like there was just like a little bit of those things. And I remember like they really wouldn't preach to people that like maybe had disabilities. Or I noticed that they would at first, but so like if someone answered the door and they'd preach to them, because they're there, right? So they preach to them, but then I noticed they would never follow up with them.
Yeah.
Like they wouldn't follow up with people that would have disabilities. And I also remember like when this was a few years in, there's a family, I think they're still there, but they're like not the most privileged, like they're poor kind of. And it was a single mom. She had a few kids. She's a little different, you know what I mean? And she was interested. And I remember that she would constantly pursue the members to come study with her, but they wouldn't follow up with her because she wasn't the ideal person that they were looking for. And so things like that kind of just stuck to me in my brain over time, because I'm like, I thought we preached to everybody and like that we didn't judge, and that everybody is God's children. So like the fact that you're kind of selecting what is a good appearance for the church is a red flag to me.
Yeah, no, that's you brought up some good points right there. Like even what you mentioned about your brother at first, it
Mm.
reminds me a lot about like how the cult operated. Like they always want to make you a cookie cutter version of themselves, right? And so like even what you said, like your brother was, finding out about his culture, and being proud of it and trying to, get in touch with his culture, with his roots. And they look down upon stuff like you can't be, in other words, you can't be yourself in that
No,
place, and I know that 100% for a fact, because it's not only just how you dress, your haircut, even the way you talk. They want to control everything. And when they say like, oh, this isn't heavenly culture, or it's not professional, as you mentioned, right? What they're really implying is our culture is the Korean culture is the best culture. Korean culture is the heavenly culture. The way we dress, the way we talk, the way we do our hair. This is the way you need to follow, right? And so it's pretty absurd now that you think about it, because in a lot of ways it's almost racist. It's not almost, it is racism. You know what I mean? Because they're always teaching that there's a reason why An San Hong and Zang Gyoja are Korean, and that God had to come from Korea. And they always say that American members have a lower mentality, no brain. We have no respect. We need to be like them. And so that's something that I was thinking about when you were mentioning that. But also there's a lot of red flags. So a lot of the stuff you mentioned is definitely true. I also remember, like, even for me, like I saw a lot of favoritism, in the church. I don't know if you saw that
um,
as well.
I was a favorite until I stopped coming as much, and then I was on the other side of it, on the other side of the end of the stick, just being treated like I wasn't really much at some point. Because when before me and my sister decided to officially leave, we're like, we still kind of believed in some of it. So we're like, well, let's keep the Passover, and if we don't like it, then we can just leave, you know. So we went and we kept the Passover one more time in 2022, I believe it was, and we were treated like complete strangers, like not like I couldn't even believe how we were treated by, and it wasn't by like the regular members, it was by the higher up members. So it was by a deaconess, and one of the members, they had just had a baby, but I hadn't gone in a while, so I didn't know that. And so I was holding her baby and she had let me hold her baby, you know, and I just had her baby in my arms for like maybe a minute or so. And the deaconess comes up and she just snatches the baby out of my arms and is like, "Oh, this sister wanted to say hi to the baby." And like she didn't even look at me, she didn't say hi to me, nothing. Like she just came and grabbed the baby, didn't say excuse me, nothing. She just was so cold to me. You know what I mean? So um, and I was noticing that from other members too. They were just kind of like very cold and not really talking to me or my sister. And so me and my sister were like, well, I guess that's all the clarity that we needed. So then we left and we
Yeah,
didn't
so
return.
so they definitely did their shunning, right? Because that's what they do. And they when they know that a member hasn't came in a while, or they think that you lost faith, or they don't think you're an asset to them anymore, then they'll definitely make you feel it. I can remember many times as well, and I also remember not only me feeling that, but I also remember like being told by the leaders when I was really really into it, like, we need to make sure that we keep a distance from these kind of members and keep these members away from the other members that are faithful, because it might be like gangrene to them. It's like, a bad apple can contaminate the rest of the apples, and stuff like that. And it's pretty crazy, because like they go from saying they love you, that they're, we're a heavenly family, it's even more real than our earthly family, and then yet, like you said, you go back and then they treat you like dirt. You know what I mean? And it's really messed up, but it also is very telling, because it kind of shows you how this place really operates, and the heart behind this kind of place. Like there is no unconditional love. And it's pretty crazy. But again, we can see that now, because we can look back at it and kind of be like, wow, like look back and say, well, yeah, those were all red flags. We just didn't notice them at the time. So let me ask you this, so you said as you started going into the church, years started going by, and you started to, kind of climb the ranks and trying to become a unit leader, and, all this. Let me ask you, did, like, during that time, did you have any doubts at all?
Um, I think I did. I just kind of it was more of my anxiety that was starting to flare up really really bad. So and I think that was trying to my body's way of telling me like there's something wrong, but to me, because I believed in it so much, I didn't want to doubt, because I felt like if I were to doubt, that I was sinning and that I was going to go to hell because I doubted. So I was like, no, I can't doubt. Like, this is the truth. If I doubt and I start to look into stuff, like, I'm going to go to hell, because if it's true, then like what am I doing? So I was like, I can't doubt. And then I just started to pray harder and all of that stuff and study more, because that's what they tell you to do too when you
Yeah.
start to doubt, to start to dive into it more, right? And so that's kind of like what I did. um and even though I would hear certain things, it definitely I definitely like would just file it in the back of my brain,
Yeah.
because they they have a good way of gaslighting you. So like, for example, I remember when they would have private sermons of Mother, and there were sermons where she would talk about depression being a sin. I remember,
Mm.
and I also remember that uh I can't remember his name now. The pastor, the head pastor,
General pastor.
pastor, yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, he would there was a private sermon of his too that they would show, and like educational ones. And he also would talk about depression being a sin. And then later down the road, I was like, well, I remember that sermon, about depression being a sin, and I have depression. So am I always just sinning, if that's the case? And they were like, "Oh, depression's not a sin. Who said that?" And I was like, Mother did in a sermon. And
Yeah.
they're like, no, we don't teach that. And I'm like, I've seen it in sermons. My sister has seen it. I was like, I clearly remember. We've also had educations about it where, deacons would talk about it, you know, and missionaries would talk about it too. So now you guys are saying that you don't teach that? So there were those things that would constantly kind of drive me crazy, that I did have doubts, but I still kept going because I still believed in like the bigger picture that was supposed to be, God, right? So those were some of the doubts I did have, because I'm like, if you're God, then why are you judging members who suffer from mental health issues, if you're God, you know what I mean? So that was like a big doubt for me at that point in time.
That's pretty crazy because I remember that time as well. I remember hearing those sermons, and it's pretty shocking hearing you say that because that's wild when you really think about it. Like you go to this church, right? And you let your guard down, you trust these people with your well-being, with your life, and because you think that they mean well. And we end up, so many members end up developing depression, anxiety, insomnia, PSTD, so many different kind of, issues. But a lot of it is a result of what we went through in the WMSCOG,
Yeah.
so it's pretty crazy that even afterwards, they're the cause of it. And then they still try to guilt trip you for it. You know what I mean? Like you said, making you feel like a sinner. And, it's pretty wild. So let me ask you this, like, while you were going through that, you said you had anxiety, right? And you, just like so many other members, you don't want to blame the church. You don't want we don't think at that time like they're the reason why, you know what I mean, our anxiety might be at an all-time high, right? So what we try to do is we try to just like, well, let's just study father's books, or let's study the truth more, right? But did that really help your anxiety get any better?
No, it just made it worse. And I remember one time I literally I was driving to church and I was going early, because I was in choir at the time. So I had to go early for practice. And on the way there, I had a really bad anxiety attack, and I couldn't drive. I had to call my sister to come get me. And I didn't end up going to service. I went home. My sister had to drive me home, and her boyfriend drove my car. And yeah, I went home and I slept for like 15 hours after that anxiety attack, and I started to have more after that. And then um there was a time too, I didn't get out of bed for a few days. So it really messed up my mental health. And I just think that, yeah, it did not do well for my anxiety. Like my mom at the time, she was in the church. She's like, just read Psalms. It will make you feel better. And I was like, no. I was like, I don't want
Yeah.
to read it. I was like, I don't want to drown myself in the Bible anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I
And
can't take it.
yeah, no, hearing you say that just reminded me of so many members, even members that have already told their stories, like, well, Dolly's, and even some members that haven't, told their story. But I know personally, like some of the members that's got really bad depression, where all they wanted to do was stay in bed, for the longest time, because these are real mental issues that you're going through in the church, and you can't never voice them to anyone, because if you try to talk about these things inside of the World Mission Society, members know that you're looked down upon. You're looked at like if you have no faith, like if you have bad faith, like if you're trying to damage other members' faith. And you have to put on this facade on the outside and show that everything is okay, right? You're 144,000, and we can't show any emotions. But inside, it's terrible what the members go through. Like even me myself, I had anxiety during that time. And even now I still deal with like insomnia. And a lot of it I associate with the church, because I remember Yeah, like when I was in the church and constantly like we would how many I remember staying, up all night studying, because they didn't care if you had to go to work the next day on a weekday. You'd stay up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning studying or going and preaching. I remember like you mentioned the year of Jubilee. During the year of Jubilee, they were making us believe like any day could be the last day. So we need to preach, preach, preach. And we were preaching till 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6 in the morning. I remember sometimes at the laundromats, and we wouldn't sleep, and so that messes with you. All the fear mongering, and what I mean. It's exhausting. Not only does this place abuse you, like spiritually, emotionally, physically, but mentally as well. And it takes a toll on you. Let me ask you this: now looking back at it, like now that you can identify kind of what you were going through at that time, what would
Yeah,
if you could go back in time and talk to yourself, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself to leave. that, that this isn't normal, and nobody, especially at the age of 23, should be feeling this low, and that any place of worship that makes you feel like this is not a place of worship. That that's not a place of worship. That is a cult.
Yeah.
100%. And I wish that I would have, known that. But when you're young, you don't have those things because you're learning life. So I feel like that's why they preach to young people more, because they're more susceptible to those types of things, and they're not really understanding what's going on yet, because you're still developing at that age. So I think that's why they do go for young adults, because
Yeah.
that's the whole reason. They don't know what's happening. They have a lot of energy, and they'll do whatever the church wants them to do, because that's when the brain is developing the most, during your young adult years.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. They definitely take advantage. They love college students, right? They love the young because if they can find people that don't have children or, don't have, careers or, not fully developed, they're in a place in their life where they're kind of vulnerable, but young. This is their bread and butter because this is where they can get you and mold you into making you what they want you to be, ultimately with the purpose of sending you out, establishing other churches or being a group leader, giving up everything to basically just serve them. And it's pretty crazy, looking back at it now, like how many members have left their families, the where they live. I have a cousin who's a leader in the church, and they shipped him out the city. He was in another state, came back to where we got preached to originally. Now they moved him to another city, which is a there's a university there. And it's just crazy because it makes you think that this place, that's all they want. It's a numbers game, and they just want these young people because, like you said, they bring the high energy. They're if they don't if they don't have any ties to anything, they can go out and they can preach all day every day and just bring people inside the church. Let me ask you this: during that time while you were kind of like going through the motions in the church and trying to become a unit leader and everything like that, where was your sister's mindset at? Like, were you able to communicate any of this to her, or did you kind of keep it bottled up to yourself?
I did, because my sister at that time, like my sister was always on and off in the church, so she'd come, but then she would kind of like leave. So that's good for her though, because she didn't get as sucked in as I did. So I would tell her stuff, and she would tell me to like that I don't need to go, or she's like, you shouldn't feel like you have to go, or stuff like that. And I just would feel so obligated to go. And then even there was a time, because you are brainwashed, or you're picking up all of the mannerisms, that I was starting to judge her for not going. So then I didn't want to tell her anything that was going on, because I'm like, well, she doesn't know, because why would she know anything that's happening? You know what I mean? I was like, she's not going to understand. So after a minute, I did stop telling her, because they make you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That moment where you're feeling kind of righteous or like self-righteous and stuff like that, and you're feeling better than somebody else because you feel like you're living a better life than the other person is, even your own family member. And it's so sad that that even had to come about. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the type of mentality I started to develop the more I was old.
And do you like recall, like, you say you're developing this kind of personality, like did you ever recall like feeling like you're losing yourself? Because
Yeah.
a lot of members explain the feeling of like, you put on this cult personality, you know what I mean, like almost like an alter ego, like you're not yourself. I felt that, so I don't know if maybe you felt like that, like did you ever feel like you were kind of slipping, you didn't know who you were anymore?
Yeah, and that's when I started to question everything because I think after COVID hit, that was when, I was the most zealous at the beginning when COVID hit. And then after like a year or so in, that's when I like left, like started to leave. Um, and because I noticed, like, I was like, why am I judging other people? Like, I really don't care how they live their lives. And then I started to realize, like, that the more I didn't care about certain things, and then the members were like, "Oh, well, you should care about that." And I'm just like, "I just don't," you
Yeah.
know? And like I just seen how like robotic everybody was, and I was just like, this is like, who wants to live like this? Like, especially after they released a video about not to listen to worldly music. I lost it. I was like, I'd rather go to hell. I was like, I love music. I can't.
Yeah.
I was like, I I really love music. Like I relate to it so much. It's a part of who I am and things like that. I was like, there's no way I'm giving music up. I can't do that. And I even remember I talked to like a unit leader about it, and she's like, "Well, as long as you don't feel guilty about it, it's all on your conscience." Then, like, I was like, "Well, the video just stated pretty much that we can go to hell for this."
Yeah.
Listening to this music. And she was like, well, as long as it's in your conscience, then whatever. So she didn't really know what to say either. But at that point, I was just like,
Yeah.
everybody's so robotic here, and like even apologizing for being funny or goofy or for certain things. Like, of course, they liked to joke around, but it's only if it was like a heavenly joking and all of that stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I just started to notice a lot of those things, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely losing my sense of self, and I'm starting to finally gain my sense of self back because I believe a study said something like after being in a cult, it can take, or a high control group, it can take up to 5 years to kind of start feeling like yourself again or to complete like your self discovery. So I'm almost there.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. You look like you're in a lot better place. Obviously, I didn't know you when you were in the church, but right now you look like you're joyful. You look like you're figuring things out, and know your family's out too. So that's got to feel great. But yeah, gradually with time, everyone gets there. It's a process for everybody. I feel like when you're young, like because a lot of us, we joined when we were so young, and so like you said, we don't have everything figured out, and they prey on that, and but fortunately, once we start getting to our 30s, close to our 30s, or we start thinking more, and using like a critical thinking and using the logical part of our brain, like it makes us see some things. We start paying attention more to the red flags, and like even right now, what you were mentioning, like, about the music and how they were trying to give you an explanation, but it didn't make sense because it was kind of contradictory. You hear one thing from your leader, but then you hear from, mother or general pastor in a sermon something totally different. And that's something that I remember was something that I struggled with a lot, is that you would hear, mother or general pastor say something in a sermon, and then you would hear the leader contradict them, you know what I mean, when they're studying with you, but they always try to justify it, and the reason why is because it doesn't make sense. You know, how many times have they changed their doctrines? Let me ask you this. You were in 2012 is a while back. Did you ever remember them teaching you that whistling was a sin? Or maybe not that one?
There was a different one. I think
Okay.
I think it was whistling, but there was, yes, I do remember whistling, but there was a different one too. It was like, you know how someone would sneeze and then you could say God bless you, but they said
Mm,
that you shouldn't do that. But I'm like, don't we say God bless you anyways? And then
yeah.
yeah, but that's a pagan practice. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what? I'm
Yeah,
like,
they yeah, it's contra. They're hypocrites, right? And they got all these weird teachings, like you said. I remember that the sneezing, you couldn't say "God bless you," right? Like it's so bad to say "God bless you," yet they overuse "God bless you" literally for everything else. And then also, like the whistling. I remember them telling us like, "Don't whistle because it's bad." And then I remember them also telling us that we shouldn't go with our family to our family's house on Christmas or on Thanksgiving because they were pagan. But yet, as the years went by, I've
they
heard them flip
go
flop.
and just pray. Yeah,
Yeah,
because like when I went in 2012, that first year, they like hosted like everything in the church, right? But then the year after that, they were like, "Oh, well, you can go to your families, just pray first, and don't open any gifts up until after Christmas. So if you get gifts, don't open them until the day after or whatever." Like,
yeah,
started to be more lenient because I think they're probably starting to lose members too because they're like, "Well, that's weird, you know." And
yeah,
so, well, actually, you can. You just need to pray first and pray over the food, your own food, and don't let them pray over it. Or if they pray over the food, and then, they would say, oh, if they pray over the food, then don't eat the food. But
yeah,
then they're on there, like, if they pray over the food, just pray over it again and you'll be
yeah,
okay. So I'm like,
yeah,
what's going on? Like, you guys keep changing stuff. And
yeah.
yeah, it
Now,
just,
now, now, watch this. Two things, right? What does that do to your brain, right? Like you hear literally one thing, and then the very next year they change it on the fly, and then they wonder why members develop anxiety, depression, all these things because it's nerve wracking. Now you're at the last year you weren't able to attend Thanksgiving with your family because you're thinking it's Satan and paganism and whatever. The very next year you're at the table with your family and now you're like lost. You don't know what to do. You feel guilty. You're like, should I be here because they just told me last year not to. Now this year they're telling me to be with my family, but what if it's a test? What should I pray, should I not pray? And then the next year they change it up a little bit more, and it's so exhausting mentally, like what they do to us, and of course people are going to develop all kinds of, like me even now I'm triggered with energy drinks. Weird, right? But the reason why is because during the year of Jubilee, they had me, missionary Michael had me driving the bus practically cross country trying to baptize people at all types of hours in the morning. So the only way I could stay up to not crash the bus with the members is slamming back energy drinks, all kinds of energy drinks that I could get my hands on at the gas stations we would stop. And so I drank so many energy drinks that now that I'm out of the cult, like I can't even see an energy drink and without getting triggered because I'm like I can't even look at it, let alone like drink an energy drink because it just reminds me of the cult, and like what they had us doing, during that time. So it's pretty crazy that like you said, you mentioned those things because it's sobering once you look back at it and you're like, wow, like how did we let them, do that to us for such a long time? So now let me ask you this, like, so now that obviously you're out of the church, but like, how did that process begin? Because it sounds like you really believed, you were suppressing your thoughts, and I mean, you had this anxiety, but you continue to try to push through it, and trying to follow what they wanted you to follow, to basically their way of making you feel better, which didn't work, obviously. But when was it like you started noticing red flags? But what was the turning point when you really started to kind of be like, okay, maybe the WMSCOG is not who they claim to be?
I was sitting in a sermon, and this is when we would go. This was during the time where we could go back to the church, but you would only go for services and then go back home. So I was sitting, and General Pastor was talking, and he was pretty much saying he was talking about Sabbath day, and he was saying that you know, uh, like those sermons when they don't really have much to talk about, or they just always reiterate the same ones. So he was reiterating about the Sabbath day, but I noticed that he was saying it was like different this time. Like I don't really remember too much because it was a while ago, but the references he was making about Sabbath and how to keep Sabbath and all of that, it was a little different. And that's strange. I was like, last year when he gave this sermon or a couple months ago, he said something completely different. And now he's saying that. And then he mentioned something about members who aren't coming as much. Instead of like being like more loving towards them and stuff, it was more of we should avoid them type thing. Like it was like something in the lines of that. But you know how they disguise their words. And so some people, it will pass right over their heads. It doesn't even click to them because you're
Yeah.
so programmed to those types of sermons that those things don't really click to you anymore. But it clicked to me because I was like, well, don't you want them to come?
Yeah.
Don't you want them to come and keep the Sabbath too? Because isn't that us being cleansed on this day? We used to always want members to come, and now you're saying this. So it was just more of like I was realizing a lot of contradictories, and just more so at that time they were more shunning of members than accepting of members during that time frame. So I was noticing like a big shift in, oh, we love you type to they're not what we're wanting or whatever, so we're just going to let them be. And then like I was just so hyper vigilant to a lot of stuff at the time because I was like starting to really question myself there, because even before that time that I was leaving, even a couple years prior, I don't even know why I didn't leave, because I remembered I was starting to feel happy again because I started to go back to dance class, and I was dancing and I was giving my time to that. And during that time, we kind of were having a lot of time off from the church. So me and my sister started to go to dance. And then when the church picked back up their activities, I wasn't going to the activities because I was going to dance class. And I was in school at the time too. So I was like actually more happy. I was starting to get back to myself and everything like that. And then, unit leader comes up to me and she goes, do you think you can only limit your dance classes to Mondays when it's free? You're missing activities on Thursdays and Wednesdays, and you need to be here. And I remember I went home that night to my sister and I was crying. And I was like, they told me I need to stop dance, you know? And I gave it up. I gave dance up. And I regret it now. But yeah, so it's just like I started to piece all of those things together during the end, and I was like, I can't believe I gave up dance for this. What have I even been doing this whole time? Like it was just like I was coming to my senses.
Yeah.
The more that I wasn't coming, the my group leader was like, "Oh, well, you're gonna start losing your senses if you keep not coming." But in my brain, I was like, I am actually gaining my senses back.
Yeah.
My senses, I'm gaining my sense of self back. And the more I was realizing that I was gaining my clarity back, my sense of self back, I was less confused the more I didn't go. I was enjoying time with friends. I was enjoying time with family. I was actually enjoying my Saturdays, sleeping in. I was enjoying, rest. I was enjoying reading books that we're not supposed to read. And I was enjoying watching TV when we're not really supposed to watch so much TV. And I was enjoying like certain stuff. And I was like, what have I been doing this whole time? I dropped out of school because I was getting too much anxiety. I stopped dancing because I couldn't do that anymore without, you know, not putting God first, right? So I realized I gave up a lot because even though they also pray, or not pray, they also praise going to school. They say that it's a good thing, right? But at the same time, you need to have time management to go to school. If you don't have time management, and that's becoming more important than church, then it's a problem at that time. Now it's your idol. See all of these contradictions, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh well, then school is becoming my idol, so I can't, like, I need to miss service so I can go to class. I need to miss practice so I can go to class. I need to miss this so that I can study and all of this stuff. But I was just always feeling guilty for it. So I stopped going, and I noticed a lot of members do that too, where they stop pursuing a lot of stuff. And so during that time when I was like leaving the church, I was noticing all of those things, and I was kind of reflecting back on my life in the church and actually what I did with my life and where I was going in my life, where my finances were, everything. And I was just like, it's a complete mess.
Yeah.
Even now, I feel like I'm still picking up the rubble from them, because I didn't have a career path. I did have a career path, but then I let it go because church was more important, you know? And I wanted to focus on finances, but then they say, oh, well, money's not a problem, or you shouldn't focus on money. Money's the devil, or money's the root of all evil. If you have it, give it to the church. So then a lot of members probably have poor finances because they're taught that money shouldn't matter, right? So there's so many effects to somebody's growth. And I was realizing that when I was leaving, that this affected my growth as an acting member of society. This
Yeah.
definitely, um, it definitely dampened everything that I was trying to do. It obliterated myself, my sense of self. And so once I realized that, and I was realizing all of this while sitting in that sermon after he said
Yeah.
contradictory thing, and I was like, I don't want to go anymore. I was like, I don't feel it anymore. I can't. And then that's when the members started to come and be like, oh, well, I'm so sorry I didn't see your pain before, and all of this. And I guess like people don't really talk about the grief you feel from leaving because you're losing a sense of community because
Yeah.
you don't really have a sense of community outside of the church. So it's very lonely when you're transitioning to being around so many people all the time that are supposed to be your family to not being around anyone. And yeah, so like but that was the moment that I realized, I was like, wow, I no longer believe in this.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome actually how it all played out, and like how you got that moment of like clarity, while being there, of all places. But you made such great points, like, as far as how, we feel like we're basically getting left behind. I remember clearly, during my years there, when, almost towards the end, I would see all my like childhood friends or my friends from high school or whatever, and they had a house, kids and careers and, everything. And you look back and you're like, I have nothing. But at the moment you're thinking like, well, but I'm living for God, right? And I'm living for the gospel, and they have no idea, they're just gonna burn. And we're actually the ones who are so blessed, and we're gonna get this much. And we feel, we're with father and mother and we're protected. but in reality, you have no sense of peace in that place. You're expendable to them. You know what I mean? Like you're not valuable to them. In one moment, you could be up here, and then the very next moment they can kick you to the curb, and that place is never designed for you to have inner peace. You can't establish your anything while being in that place. You can't, it's hard for you to try to buy a home while being in that place, especially if you have aspirations to be a gospel worker. That what I remember they specifically teach, like, just like the Israelites, in the time of Exodus, when they kept the Passover, they had to have their clothes ready and eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. And so they tell you, you always got to be on the move, and you always got to have all your things with you in case one day we need to send you out somewhere. And so they say things indirectly that cause members not to focus on their physical life, with a house, a career. And so that affects you. You know what I mean? Like you said, even now, like members that get out, they struggle financially, and even leaders that, I think, like, one thing is, we leave in our 20s or in our 30s, but could you imagine even some of the leadership that has left, and they have left? I've talked to many leaders left in their 40s or 50s or 60s. How much more harder would that be to try to pick up your life at that age? I mean, we think it's hard now. Just imagine those people, and like it just shows that there is nothing to gain at this place, like you're essentially just losing yourself, and you're just losing time. Years are going by, and you're missing out on the most beautiful things that God gave us in this world. And I feel like one of the things that you mentioned is, they make you feel guilty about everything. You love to dance, right? And so they made you feel so guilty about it, like, give it up, right? Because they suck the life out of anything in that place, right? They don't want you talking about anything that sounds fun, anything that you like they want to control everything, and they make everything that's not a part of Zion feel like it's like the devil. It's just worldly, but they don't even believe actually what the Bible teaches, because in the Bible, when God created everything on this earth, he called it very good, right? And they're the opposite. They make it sound like everything in this earth is just bad. It's terrible, it's sinful, and it's pretty, like you said, they're just hypocrites. At the end of the day, they're hypocrites, and it's so sad what they do to the members. But very, very interesting story how you realized all that while you were, in the church. And that's amazing. So now, when you actually left, once you got that moment of clarity, and you're like, okay, I'm not coming back, and you said the members, they now they're like acting like they really want to, like, bring you back. What made you, like, stand your ground and be like, did you entertain that thought when they were talking to you, or like were you firm on your decision at that point?
I was very firm.
Okay, and how'd your sister take it?
She was already out. So like, and so the time that they were pursuing me to come more was before the Passover. This is also before we kept the Passover the last time. So they noticed that I stopped coming as much, and I would only come like one service every Saturday. I wouldn't come to the third days hardly. And then sometimes I would go a month or 2 months without coming. So they started to notice. And like, once they started to notice I wasn't coming, Deaconess would call me, "Oh, we miss you. Oh, da da da. We're so sorry that you're going through depression, and we want you to come back. We're here for you." Another sister would come over, "I'm so sorry I didn't see your pain before," and this and that. Like, they seemed so apologetic. But after a minute, once they noticed that their efforts weren't really taking, um, that's when they started to kind of back off a little bit. And then we went for the Passover, and then after that, we didn't hear from them anymore.
Yeah.
But during that time frame, they helped me move out of my apartment to a different place, and all of that in efforts to kind of get us back. And then, like, they would come and visit randomly, and I wouldn't answer the door. And
Yeah.
certain things like that, and then I eventually just ended up blocking them, because me and my sister just realized, like, how much damage they have done. And at this time, my mom also wasn't going as much either. And then she still like believed in it, but then she stopped going as well. And I don't know. That's around the time frame though. Is yeah, they did try to have a lot of efforts for sure when I first started showing signs that I wasn't interested anymore. And then it's crazy because then I hear that the same a deacon that was in my church, he also left like probably a year later than I did. So that was pretty awesome though. I'm glad he left.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's crazy.
That's cool to hear. So what year was it when you actually left?
2022. And
2022.
then
Okay.
2021 is the year that I was not going as much. So I was like, I was missing Saturdays. I started to miss Bible studies and things like that. And um, I'm thankful though, because that's when I actually got into a relationship. And I feel like me being in that relationship kind of enlightened me because I was still kind of going here and there. But then I was just like noticing certain things, and he was enlightening, my partner at the time was enlightening me about certain things, and I was just like, and like I started to just like question more things, and I'm like, this is probably why they don't want you to date people outside of
Mm,
the church, or they want you to bring them in the church, because if not, then they can pull you out, you
yeah.
know what I mean? And so I was starting to just see all of those things too. So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's so hard to relate with people outside of the church, right? And so they do a very good job of that, of like consuming your time because they don't want you to associate with people outside the church. And even if you have like a rare time to be able to do that, it's so hard to relate to someone that's never been in a cult. But if you're around them long enough and they care about you sincerely, like you said, if they start looking at the pattern of your life, what you're doing, your daily routine in the cult, they're going to question some things like that doesn't seem, normal, right? And so it's kind of cool that, you were able to get that, vantage point, from your partner at that time because, unfortunately, a lot of members don't get that, a lot of members, the only people they have to talk to are the people in the cult. And that's by design because again, like you said, they don't want you to talk to anybody out there because there's that chance to pull you out, but it's very cool that how you were able to kind of see those things. But I think at that point you kind of were already seeing, all the red flags and understanding, and so that's pretty cool. Now let me ask you this. Let's get to the good part of this interview now. Like, since you left, how much better has your life gotten?
It's been a rough, like a little rough, but I will say that even though I have gone through rough patches, I don't sit in the back of my mind thinking that I'm being punished because I didn't go to service one day, or I don't I don't think I'm being punished because I didn't study that one time, or because I thought this or I did this. Now I'm just like, this is life and it happens. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
going to be okay. But in the church, they teach you like, oh, you need to watch what you do, what you say, like, because if you leave, then your life is going to be crazy and it's never going to be good. But I've had good times. I've gone out of state, I've gone on trips. You know what I mean? I've had a lot of time with friends. I've been able to go to weddings, you know, and stuff like that. I've been able to have experiences with my family, and so I'm thankful that I'm out, because I feel like if I was still in, I would have missed a lot of stuff still.
Yeah.
So I would say life is better, even with all of the struggles it comes with. It's a lot better than being in that place.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, obviously we all have our things that we go through in life, but I'll say this, I'll take any struggle that I go through now than another day inside the WMSCOG because
It makes it way worse. It makes
yeah,
like when you go through something, and if you're in that church still, it maximizes it completely. It maximizes the issue like a times 10. And so like back then, I got in a car accident when I was in the church, and I was thinking that, that I was being punished for something, you know, and because I didn't have enough faith, or like God is trying to knock some sense into me, so that's why I'm going through this type thing. But now I don't, when I'm going through something, I do pray, but I don't like, I don't initially think that it's God punishing me, you know,
Right.
because
Yeah.
because of all the doubts that you may have, and a lot of members might have doubts sometimes, and they're like, oh my God, I'm going through this because, I doubted. Like,
Yeah.
I remember one time too, not mother, Zongil Jha, she was doing a sermon, and she was saying how a brother broke their arm, and she went to visit the brother in the hospital, and and he was like, I shouldn't have disobeyed you. I should have listened to you. This is why I'm in here.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh my gosh, like so many people might think that they're going through those things because they disobeyed or because they doubted one time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's crazy because yeah, I remember that story, and again, it's a nothing but guilt tripping, fear tactics, guilt tripping, fear mongering, and they make you believe like this woman, like you disobeyed this woman, that's why all these crappy things are happening in your life. Meanwhile, this lady's breaking, so many, so many her own laws. If she is God, obviously she's not, but if she was, she breaks all the laws in the Bible because she's sinned more than anyone else that I can know of. Like if people only knew the real history behind her, like it's eye opening, right? And so it's so crazy, that they hold us to a standard that even their founders did not live by. You know what I mean? And it's very ironic, but again, they do a very good job of concealing the information, guilt tripping you to where you're even scared to doubt, you're scared of to do anything because you think anything that's going on in your life is like a punishment from God. And that's, again, what does that do to your brain, especially a young person? Like I always think like I feel so bad because not just the young adult members, but what about the children, right? I always lately, the children have been a lot on my mind. The children have to sit there and watch the same videos that we watch and hear the same things that we hear. What does that do to them growing up? That has to damage them mentally, you know what I mean? And it's so sad. Let me ask you this, like if you could give advice, to any member that could be, watching this testimony, this interview of yours, what advice would you give them?
I would tell them to um, take time away from the church. Like, I don't care if you're going to feel scared. Don't go on a Saturday one day. Don't go on a Tuesday one day, and really sit with yourself and think to yourself what type of life you want and where your life is now. Have time for self-reflection on your whole life. Do you have regrets that you missed certain things with your family? Do you have regrets that you uh, didn't take up a certain work opportunity? Do you have any type of regret? Because I feel like that's what's going to bring you back to who you are as a person, and that's what's initially going to take you out of that church mentality and that mindset.
Yeah.
Because you should be comfortable enough to be yourself, and uh, you know, a religious organization, they should accept you for who you are. So if you're feeling slightly out of place in that church, then it's time to take a step back and actually reevaluate your life and what your values are and what you want for your life.
Yeah, great advice because again, if it's the perfect truth, then nothing, it's not going to go anywhere if you take a week off, 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off to reflect, right? Like you said, if
Mhm.
it's true, it will stand. The problem is members don't do it, and because they know if they take that time to reflect, you're gonna find out, you're gonna realize like your life is not where you want it to be, and the main cause is the WMSCOG. So and that's why the leadership does a very good job of trying to keep the members occupied, no time for yourself, so that you don't have that time for self-reflection. So yeah, I concur, that's great advice. Like to the members who are watching this, take the time and evaluate your life. Is it getting better, do you're doing all this for salvation? Do you even feel like you've obtained that salvation, or do you feel like a hamster on a wheel, like they're dangling that salvation in front of you because it's not designed for you to ever feel like you've achieved the salvation or the peace that the Bible promises, right? And so I think all those things are very important. And then another thing, if you ever do leave, look at their true character as soon as you leave, just like you said what they did with you, right? Like you show up on the Passover and then they just shun you, and rest assured that they will talk about you behind your back. Every member that has left, any leader that has left, they constantly talk about members behind their backs because members cannot tell their side of the story. That is why they're discouraged from, communicating with other members inside the church, so that if you leave, they can control the narrative, right? No one can ever hear the other side of the story. So you only believe what the WMSCOG tells you about them. I mean, think about it. Even the people that wrote the new songs, right? Some of those people left, and then what they do, they just remove those new songs and say we can't sing them anymore because these members fell away. So, in other words, their new song is no good anymore, right? Give it back to them. But wait a second, WMSCOG, I got a question for you. What about the tithe and the offerings of all the members that have left? Is that not good anymore either, since they were given by members that are not good, not believers? So maybe all the members that have left should be, able to receive compensation for everything that they gave into the church. They'll never say that, right? They'll never give that money back, right? Because they're selective, they pick and choose. And so, just it's just some things that cross my mind. But I really enjoyed this conversation, Scarlett. Is there any final words that you want to mention or anything you want to get off your chest?
Just that I'm happy that I'm out. And anybody that's leaving or thinking about leaving, it's okay. You're going to be just fine. Your life will get better, and you deserve to have a life. You deserve to be a human being. So don't ever let them take that away from you. And yeah, just be your full authentic self. And if you do still believe in God, it's okay to pursue that outside of that church. It's okay to still discover what your beliefs are. You don't have to stay there if you don't want to.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's okay to not know. It's okay to want to find out, to take your time, to take a break. Whatever path you want to go down, it's okay. What's not okay is staying in that toxic relationship, which that's what it is when you're inside the WMSCOG, right? So yeah, it's very very important to leave. Scarlett, let me ask you one last thing. Since now that you've left, right? And you've been out for a few years now. My final question to you is, what made you now want to be able to tell your story?
I think just looking back on my life and reflecting all the sadness and heartache that I went through, all of the fights that I had with my siblings, especially my brother feeling alone because we weren't there on his birthday. We would choose church over that, or there's just certain things that made me kind of resent that church. And I feel like I lost a lot of my time to them. And it made me want to tell the story because I don't want anybody else to lose more time there. There's a lot of good people that are in that church that I know that I feel like would benefit from leaving. And they're just there because they're obligated, or they feel obligated to be there. So I really want those people to leave, and I want them to have a happy life while they still can, before it's too late. Because a lot of them are still young, they're still in their 30s, and some of them in their like late 20s, and they can still have enough time to reconstruct their life if they get out now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, thank you for, being brave enough to share your story. And I guarantee you that there's going to be many people that benefit from listening to your story. I think that you did a great job, and your story is very telling. I think it gives a very, deep look at what the WMSCOG is all about. So, I'm very appreciative to you that you decided to come on the show and tell your story. And, again, to everybody out there watching, please support the channel, subscribe, like, and comment so we can get this content out to everybody as much as we can, all the members of the WMSCOG. And if anyone wants to come out and, share your story, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're here for you. And until next time, thank you for watching another episode of Diffusing the WMSCOG.